Hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience. I was having some technical difficulties getting on today. It looks like there's only 5 of us so far, so we'll give it another minute, see if anybody joins in. Thanks for being here. Hey, everyone.
Hey there.
So we have the latest versions of the materials on the SMMP subcommittee webpage. So we'll be working through those a bit, as well as I think we have to cover 3 topics that our subcommittee wants more feedback on from the larger work group. So we'll try to piece those together as well. Yeah, and then we'll draw our attention, essentially let the group kind of guide the focus when we're talking about the content of the subcommittee report, and just make sure that we're getting to everything that we need to cover as we dive into this next larger work group drafting phase, focusing on key recommendations and key findings from the work that we've done. Has anybody had a chance to look at the key recommendations and key findings that I've kind of compiled so far based on what we've put together? Okay. So generally, I've kind of made a I've noticed that our work ends up looking like a lot of key recommendations, but the key findings piece is on the light side, and I think part of that is me not doing a great job of capturing key findings in our discussion as it comes up, because I think it's essentially we're discussing things, we're having key findings, and then we're jotting down key recommendations as we go along. So I'm hoping that just through collaborative effort, we can try to capture those key findings. Essentially, if we can sort of backtrack, and I think a lot of this might have to happen offline, but if you can help me kind of put in those key findings so that we can essentially establish how we got to the key recommendations. But I don't know if that makes sense to everyone else. I've just noticed that we've gotten to a lot of key recommendations on basically all of our focus areas, which is excellent. I just thought we could include those key findings that I've definitely been light on, and I'm trying to go back and sort of sort that out. Yeah, Marge.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what you mean offline. A lot of this work can be done offline. What does that encompass?
Yeah, I just meant you can send me the key findings that you think are missing, essentially, in the document, and I can add that to our larger group document. But obviously, we have an hour and a half today to talk about it as well. I just mean if there's anything that isn't added during our meeting today, you can always send those to me in between meetings via email through editing that document. My goal is to any edits that I receive, I'll compile into one document. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, just wanted to kind of back up what you're saying. When I look at the document, it seems like there was a lot of discussion, a lot of thought that went into like the outline, for example, and the product of that outline doesn't really seem to capture. We end up with this, we include some section in the outline, which is 5 words, but there was a lot of discussion about why we wanted to have a section in there. So I'm just kind of reinforcing what you're saying. For me, I look at the outline and say, a lot of the process, was just not reflected in the final product. The outline was derived originally from something that someone else had done at some other county. There have been additions put into the outline, but we don't show anywhere what we inherited and what we innovated, kind of all that sort of thing. So that just seems to me like a good place for key findings to kind of backfill that, again, as much as we can remember about the process.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, Sean.
Respecting the input, I've always been curious with this whole process about how usable the end result's going to be. and how much information is going to be in there. I didn't know if that, I respect your input, Ken. I just didn't know if that was necessary. Regardless of the commissioners, this is our recommendation. How much background do we need, minute notes and all that kind of stuff? I'm just trying to look at this as a balance of being usable versus comprehensive, something digestible versus war and peace. It's like, where's that middle ground? I completely respect you, Ken. I really do, your input. I just didn't know, Daniel, in your conversation with Sam, Darren, whomever, is this the high, 20,000 feet? This is what we came in, and a brief description. And if we did want something, either minute notes or something along those lines, if they had those details. So I completely respect you, Ken. I totally hear what you're saying. Just trying to see how this can be more usable, as opposed to everything under the sun, and finding that sweet spot. Again, not ignoring either side, but just trying to find that middle ground.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I can speak to it a little bit. Sam's jumping on, which I'm sure he'll be able to add in his 2 cents. Obviously after we made it relatively far along in our kind of work product, we were given the sort of template of key findings and key recommendations and started thinking about things in those terms. And I think generally we want to incorporate your kind of higher level concepts in here, just to make it accessible for the reader and the work group to digest this information and put together and put forth their recommendations. So I think generally it should be relatively high level. I don't think it should be every little detail of our conversations that got us to recommendation. I also think the recommendations are particularly important because that's, essentially what the work group is going to be weighing and determining whether or not that will be their recommendation as well. But those key findings are really, I think, going to support their path to sort of vetting those recommendations. So I think there's going to be a balance in terms of how detailed to make those key findings. But I think we can always add that information and then take out details if it's too much and not digestible. But yeah, I think we'll have to strike that balance. Go for it, Marge.
Oh, I'm just wondering, we had this table of contents of what the finished report should contain, but I didn't see that in the work group, what we were presenting to the work group. Is that a link somewhere that I'm missing, or did I just miss a whole table?
Yeah, so the table of contents, are you talking about, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the table of contents, yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of what we're presenting to the work group, what are you talking about?
I'm saying I didn't see it in the work group report.
Oh, in the draft that just went out. It should. So I was trying my best to incorporate all of our detail in the longer report in a summarized way and in the shorter draft recommendations and key findings. I think I don't have it right in front of me. I think my approach was essentially calling out the longer document and saying, we've drafted these subjects to be considered or subjects to be included in the SMMP. That table is here. That full table is in the appendix of our larger report. And then it's also listed as questions to be answered in that report as well. So I think I called them both out as, the group is recommending that.
But it didn't contain the table of contents, right? It's not like I missed the whole big thing. It's just not there.
One of the key recommendations was not, here's a table with all the detail included.
We spent so much time on that, Daniel. Wasn't a lot of time spent on working on that table of contents?
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any suggestions?
Oh, I just expected it to be in the report.
So it is in the report, but do you have any suggestions on how it's presented should be improved?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I was comfortable now with the way in which I've been seeing it for the last a number of months. And I just didn't see it that way in the report. And that just surprised me, because in other subcommittees, the things we were working on really did make it into the report. But, you know, maybe I'm just not understanding.
Yeah, go for it, Sean.
Daniel, I see it here on page 61 as a link. The full subcommittee report can be found here and in section 3, so on page 61. I'm cool with that. I mean, you have it there, and that's where you have the table of contents. Maybe making it bigger or something like that, or bold, or I mean, flashy neon. I don't know. You have to ask Corey. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think part of it, I think there's two parts going on. I think Marge's concern partially highlights, you know, what is the difference between the key recommendations and key findings in that summarized form versus our larger, detailed, longer report. How those get translated is a really important piece, and that's something I want to talk about. And I basically want to make sure that we nail it, make sure that we feel comfortable with how that information is transposed into, you know, what we're calling key findings and key recommendations. If the approach that I've taken in terms of basically saying, here's a link to this detailed table, and the recommendation is that the SMMP includes all of this information, if that sort of summarized approach is not appropriate based on the feedback from the subcommittee, that's the conversation that we're having now. So this is totally free form. You can offer your opinions and we can discuss basically how better to approach it. But I welcome all that feedback. So I guess, and that I think that goes for other items too, right? So we have this table of contents that we put a ton of time into. I think there's a couple other pieces that we call out in our recommendations, basically referencing that larger work, saying we did all this work. Here's essentially a list of topics that we want to include in the SMMP. And instead of listing every single one of those topics in the key recommendations, we reference it. So I recommend just reading through that, seeing if you like that approach, if you think there's going to be a better approach. I'm totally open to updating that however is needed. Hey, Sam.
Hey.
All right. Sam, do you have anything from your end that you wanted to cover today?
No, the only thing that's probably already on the agenda is to make sure you have spokespeople for tomorrow afternoon's presentation.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. And Ryan, I think I saw your mic go off. Yeah,
I just was going to, so if I'm on the website and I'm looking at I want to make sure I'm looking at the right document. So it's the draft updated Benton County Talks Trash Subcommittee work group. And then I see Appendix A, it says drafted table of contents outlining elements recommendations, page 19. Again, just trying to, am I looking at the right document or did I pull up the wrong one?
so I think you're looking at the right document here. So that's the document that's our working document that we're using right now. Marge is referencing also the key recommendations and key findings that made it into the report that Sam sent out. Essentially.
Okay.
So yeah, so Marge is talking about, you know, how did we transpose our larger document into the key findings and key recommendations that make it into the body of the work that Sam went out, and then also our full report has also been transposed to fit into the appendix of that larger document as well. It's like 500 pages or 350 pages.
350 some pages. It's fairly extensive. Okay, so all right, that makes sense. So I guess I understand kind of the disconnect between the two, because I was trying to put the pieces together. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sean, I think I saw your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, how about one of the things I've really appreciated this whole process is the 21st century concept of links. So I was curious I'm on page 62 now, of the key findings, to have those links per topic when it gets into whatever it is. So subjects to be covered could link to the table of contents. Recommendations could be the Vision 2040, Driving Communities Initiative. That could be a link to the resources. I know that's kind of quite time consuming to be constantly going link and link. But I'm curious about your capacity, or whomever's the general you, of having that as an option, as opposed to putting all of this into the document. It's just a thought. I'm not throwing on a sword either way.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I think there's a couple pieces of that. I think where there's opportunities to put links in the body of our recommendations or the body of our larger report, I think that's a great. We should flag those and basically call those out, so we can add those. I think, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in later versions of the draft, the goal is also to actually have a link within each recommendation that takes you to the kind of appropriate section where it's represented in the full report. So basically the idea is, if the reader, I think first the work group being the reader and then the Board of Commissioners eventually, the idea is if they're interested in the background of that recommendation or the background of that finding, they could press a link and be brought to the full report, so that all of that information, all of that background, all that work that we did with more detail is adequately represented and accessible. So I think there's two parts. There's links to just additional information that we can help simplify some items within the body of our work, and then the functional links that take the recommendation and findings to the key area of the report.
So let me provide a little context, which is underscoring what Daniel said. Let's assume for this discussion that the subcommittee has a 100-page report. I am suggesting that in the full work group report, that be reduced to 10 pages that has the key findings and recommendations, because as it stands, the work group report is just under 100 pages. I am concerned about the accessibility of a reader who is not familiar with this day in, day out. So the concept is, in those roughly 10 pages, each of the key findings will have a hyperlink. That hyperlink, when clicked, will go to the actual section of the subcommittee report that provides more details on that. So that is how we are approaching this for all of the other subcommittees. Some of the subcommittees' work is each subcommittee is in a kind of a different stage of evolvement, but the draft that's going to go out next Wednesday, which is the draft for the Planning Commission SWAC/DSAC, hopefully will have each of those findings and recommendations linked to the body. I do not know, using Marge's example here, I'm sorry, I had internet trouble, so I'm phoning in, but let's assume you have a finding that says, we recommend that any future SMMP include the following key sections to it. And this is, of course, in the 10 pages in the body of the work group report. You can just string cite those 10 topics and then hyperlink them to the back. So these 10 pages are kind of an expanded executive summary.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, Sam,
Go for it, Ryan.
That makes sense, because when I opened up the 354-page document, obviously realizing it's the full work group report, that's kind of one thing that struck me, is how are we going to make this understandable for the general public or folks that want to access it. I like what you're saying, to view it as an expanded executive summary. I think that adds some clarity and lets us dig into areas or lets the public dig into areas in the future, whoever's going to reuse it. Thank you.
Go for it, Marge.
Yeah, and a link, as you suggested, links throughout that link to a larger document, specific sections in a larger document, not just one link saying, oh, there's a larger document back there, but how these points relate. I think that would be really important.
Thanks, Marge. Yeah, and I think for an example, if you're looking at that the full subcommittee, or sorry, the full work group report that Sam sent out last night, if you're looking at our kind of subcommittees section, page 64, is a good example where we're covering the key recommendations for subjects to be covered. That each of these recommendations essentially would be linked to the place in the full subcommittee report where they're discussed in detail. So that way, when you're clicking on that link, if you do reference a larger body of work that we've covered, that just for purpose of summarizing, we couldn't include the whole thing in here, they'll have access to that, and we're not losing all of that work, but rather referencing it for simplicity. But any of the ways that I've phrased recommendations, because a lot of it didn't exist in these sentence formats, just let me know if you have any suggestions on improving them, adding a level of detail, removing a level of detail. This is our first shot at putting this together, and we want to make sure that the group feels comfortable with it. So this is essentially why we're meeting, to figure out what works and what doesn't with the drafts that we're putting forward. So feel free to review those, any recommendations or suggestions.
So I like what you're saying, just because I'm looking at page 63 where it says, point E, the RFP development process should include, and then we've got a whole bunch of subsections that, are very which is great. That's all the content we worked on. But it seems like, if I hear you right, we're just going to say, for RFP development, here's a link to what the RFP development should include. And there's a short link there, and then it gets all this content here. So then it takes all this, page and a half of, detailed information, rolls it up, sticks it on a separate page that if I happen to not care about that, I don't have to look at it and overwhelm my brain. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was my intention. And there you'll find a couple areas where, I was able to simplify it. And then this example is a good one where there is such a diversity of content within our, the RFP process should include. It has such a range of different types of information there that I wasn't really able to adequately lump it up without the reader really not knowing what we're talking about. So any suggestions with how to summarize this better than it already is, feel free to let me know. I gave it my best shot without trying to lose kind of major important topics. So yeah, any suggestions on that? If you think it's adequate to simply link to that section of our report in total and say, we've developed a set of recommendations for what a diversity of different items that an RFP process should include. Here they are. We could do that, but yeah, just maybe review it and think about it, and send me some recommendations on how best to approach it. Yeah, Marge.
Yeah, I just real quickly went to the main document and just did a search on circular, because I thought that one thing that we had, discussed very strongly throughout the whole process was having this aspiration to move beyond the way in which we handle waste now, to incorporate these ideas of materials management and starting at the source. And I was just kind of surprised that there were only 2 mentions, and it was both on the same page. So I don't know, maybe you're calling it something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
forward thinking kind of things.
yeah, I mean, I've included basically everything that we've talked about that were framed up as recommendations so far. Sometimes we've discussed circular economies. I know we've talked about it in terms of equity, but also in terms of cost benefit analysis, focusing on a circular economy approach. But we've also frankly been talking about sustainable materials management, which is largely embedded in a new framework of thinking, of which circular economy and circular approaches are one of them.
One way.
Yeah, so I think we've discussed it in a variety of different ways, but the caveat there is we need to make sure that those concepts are adequately captured. So if you do see something that you don't think is, in there that we've been discussing and should be, feel free to put it in, because we definitely don't want to miss anything.
Maybe I focus wrongly on that word circular, but that concept of source, we begin at the source with respect to thinking about this issue. I guess I would have, but maybe it's not to the point yet that you actually put the points in, group them. Did you feel like you grouped them according to major headings, or did you feel like that's something that's yet to come?
So I've grouped in terms of our key findings and key recommendations on the work group report that Sam sent out last night. I've just grouped those by charge. So basically, the idea is that we want to make sure that when the work group is considering each aspect of our charge, they're kind of considering the recommendations and findings that go into those. So I did my best to group them by charge. But I didn't.
An entirely different way of looking at it, not looking at the end product, but looking at.
Well, that's one part of it. So then the end product being the subjects to be covered in the table and in the questions to be answered that we focus on in our subcommittee report. Those are all grouped by concept. So there's a sustainable materials management section of that, which is largely going to focus on the sort of circular ideas that you're mentioning. Those are all
Is
proposed
that in the main
subjects.
document? That's not in the main document, though.
I mean, it is at the end, yeah, in the appendix, but it's referenced.
It's not a main point. It's not a main findings.
The main recommendation says the SMMP should address the subjects listed in the full subcommittee report, answering the questions listed as RFP priorities allow. So it's in there as a main point, but that's what we're just talking about is, how do we best summarize major sections of our larger document to fit into these key findings and key recommendations? That's what we're trying to figure out. So if that doesn't adequately meet the needs of the subcommittee, that's a good area to focus your attention on providing me with any suggestions for improvement on that. But I think the idea is for some of the more complex work products that we're putting together, it's all captured in our full subcommittee report at the very least. And now we're just trying to, how do we direct the work group and the Board of Commissioners' attention to the areas that are written down in the key findings and key recommendations adequately, I guess. So we'll have to develop that more, but definitely want your feedback and anybody's feedback on how to improve that, how to communicate that better. Yeah, Sean.
So this is helpful. Thank you. I had one thought on organizing, but before we get to that, to get to Marge's point, now that I'm looking at this, when I see introduction on page 61, this looks pretty pro forma as opposed to a potential description of what we think the Sustainable Materials Management Plan should be. I mean, this is like, hey, here are our key recommendations. It's been approved. Robert's Rules of Order kind of language-ish, as opposed to something that could be more informative and where the subcommittee feels this needs to be. Cradle to cradle, not looking at just coffin view, like how to circular economy, that kind of thing. But I don't want to destroy, if Sam, you, Darren, or others had, like, this is how the format you want it to be. Am I making sense at all?
I think you're making sense. You're talking about the introduction piece.
Yeah, just that one paragraph, and I was curious if that was intentional to make sure all the five chunks,
Yeah.
5 chapters are start the same, which I totally can appreciate, like making sure it's continual and consistent,
Yeah.
as opposed to something that this committee feels that we need to shift to this new cradle to cradle thing.
I can speak to my approach on it, and then maybe Sam can speak to his hopes for this. The way it was described to me by Sam originally in this introduction section is largely, essentially what's the group's charge and how did we go about approaching the charge. But then the content of the recommendations would be, and the findings would actually be in the key findings and key recommendations. So I didn't anticipate the introduction to have like content about what the group was hoping that the outcome of this would be, but maybe more of the approach that we took. But Sam, I'm happy to get your feedback, and frankly, if anybody has ideas on what they would rather have included in that introduction section, I'm all ears. I did my best to capture what we had so far.
And before Sam goes, that makes total sense to me, because that's more the process, and we can get into the actual recommendations. So I just thank you for the guidance. I agree with that.
So I think it is the will of the subcommittee to some degree. If they want to have, it absolutely does need as part of the introduction, it absolutely does need here's how we approached it, and here's a guide to what follows section, so the reader has cues as to what he, she, or they are getting into. If at the end we have key findings, key recommendations, additional information, if you want to drop a conclusion to the overall themes, like the full cycle or circle is important. We're going beyond a solid waste management plan to a sustainable materials management plan. You want to plop that in there. That's fine, and it may well be that we can move that up. So introduction has 2 parts, is our overall goal for this work, which I just described as a conclusion, but then how to read the following 10 pages also is important, so the reader knows. And leave you guys to figure out how best to do that.
I like that. I
Thanks,
think we
Sam.
could come. Yeah, I think we could get a quick paragraph, either copy and paste it from our notes or something like that. I can take a crack at that on Friday.
Thanks, Sean.
I usually don't like to recommend if I'm not willing to put myself out there. So it's either that or you make me chair this whole thing next time, and I don't want that.
I mean, one thing you could add in that paragraph is something like the SMMP subcommittee suggests, for reasons that will become obvious, that we were the best subcommittee of all the BCTT subcommittees. And here, please read the following and bask in our brilliance and glory. That might be just a nice introduction.
I just don't like to waste people's time with the painfully obvious, Sam. So
that's a valid point, John. Thank you. That's valid.
I want everyone to know that I started typing that in my notes at first to make sure I was capturing all of this important discussion. Yeah, Sean.
Excellent. Now to get to your fundamental question, I was trying to get to the point, because I know we're already running a little behind. I really liked Ryan's comment about having those links, and I was trying to work through this, starting on page 63 with the key recommendations, and curious if we could just keep the C1 KR1 and then just the letters. And I think that works pretty well all the way down, and I think that could cut a lot of material out with a link. I think some of the language would have to be just a little tweak, like the RFP development process should include or something like that, and then it gets the I, because that's a full page right there, and gets really, really detailed. Project schedule, 10 points. The only one where I got tripped up was on page 65 with who needs to be at the table. those are all letters, but I think that that could be an A. The committee recommends the following entities at least be included, and then that's linked to the list. And I think just by doing that through the, I'm seeing C1KR8, I mean, that's got to get rid of at least 5 or 6 pages and be really tight. And so someone who's just kind of interested can just kind of see a flavor and then shoot off to where the details are. Ryan, I hope I didn't butcher your thought.
No, Sean, that's exactly what I was trying to, that's where I was going with this, is because we want to keep all this stuff. And to your point too, who should be at the table, that could even just be a link, say exactly. A link to recommendations on who should be at the table. And then there's a short link and it comes to a page and it's got a whole big, list of everyone there, so that it shows that we've identified who we think needs to be at the table, and then like you said, the RFP, suggested RFP outline, and there's a link to everything there. And I think that is going to clean it up, because I think, yeah, I'll stop there. I agree.
Thank you both. Any other thoughts on that? I have one thing that came up during the drafting of this, and the reason why some of it was sort of intended to reference the body of work being that like table of contents that we worked on, for example, when it was all kind of similar content and very detailed, versus some other sections where I list off like the, who should be at the table lists. And the only hesitation I have with essentially putting in the links to each and leaving out some level of that content is for folks that are almost inevitably not going to go down the link rabbit hole. Basically for like the work group members who aren't interested enough to dive into the full body of work, but are interested enough to try to grasp a larger concept that we put together. I'm just wondering if we can strike a balance for that. I worry that we're not actually going to leave the work group, and if they adopt it, the Board of Commissioners, with a kind of a clear picture of what we're actually talking about. I don't know, that's my kind of thinking around it, is trying to strike that balance of how much detail to include to get so that the readers get the gist. Like the who should be at the table, do we say, the group recommends a mix of, different jurisdictions, nonprofits and community groups or whatever, as a way to summarize our big list and then have a link to the big list, things like that. I just want to make sure that we're leaving them with the sort of flavor of our content at the very least, so they know what they're voting on if they don't go down those link rabbit holes. And maybe Sam can speak to that more too, but not sure. You might be frozen, Sam. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Ryan.
So I like what you're saying, Daniel, because I think that does make sense, that, try to capture it a little bit better, with almost a mini executive summary that's like a sentence and a half, and then for further, that kind of summarizes the subsection, and then there's a link after that. Because you're right, who should be at the table, should be community members, governments, and all this stuff. For full list, click on this link. And I think that's a great, and just going back to the RFP is, intended, will be an extensive process that involves multiple steps. For a full description, click here, and then boom, then it's got so that you're right, as folks that are reviewing this, they at least have a sample of what's there instead of just glossing it over, maybe something.
Thanks, Ryan. Sam, I heard you speak up earlier.
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
And my internet was off for some reason, so now I'm back on in the Zoom versus my phone. So I agree with what was just said. So just to give you a preview of what the method to the madness is. Let's say each subcommittee has 10 key findings and 10 key recommendations. The polling that's going to go out to the public, and informal polling to the workgroup members, is going to be for each of those recommendations and findings, do you poll 1, 2, or 3? So my half-formed thought before the last meeting is we send out that the then existing version of this report, ask every work group member to vote 1, 2, or 3 on that. We'll condense all that information. So going into the final meeting, we will know here are the topics in the SMMP subcommittee's report where everyone voted 1, so we don't need to discuss them again. Here's ones where here are the ones that people voted 2. Well, let's engage in a conversation of how we in good faith can make modifications to it. So those people that voted 2 will vote 1. And then here are the issues where we had 3s and do that. That's the only way we're going to get through, that many findings and recommendations.
Thanks, Sam. So I guess for steps forward, I have a couple takeaways that maybe I can help out with. First is going through our key recommendations and our future very robust set of key findings and trying to essentially summarize them as best as I can. That isn't so much of a copy and paste from our main document, but a brief summary that includes enough information for the workgroup members to really understand what we're getting at. And then include links. This will be for the next draft once there's linkable opportunities, but include links to that section of the document. Does it make sense for me to take on that task of trying to do a better job, essentially kind of summarizing it, capturing the gist of that key recommendation? I think it might be less so with the key findings, but I'll do my best once we start populating those. Is that a good next step for the group? I'm seeing some
I think
nods.
you'd have to, given the time frame. Again, in a perfect world, we get the SWAC DSAC Planning Commission draft, which goes out Wednesday night, that has what you're talking about done. So that's a week from today. So I don't know that you're going to have time to everyone should be able to look at it and make edits, but to what Daniel does. But the first round, he's so familiar with it, I'd strongly recommend he take the first shot, and then you can track change nuances.
All right. Well, I saw a couple nods. Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, I just agree with that. I think what you said makes sense, to just create just a high level summary for each item there and take a quick run at it, and then where the links need to begin to minimize the content and where that makes sense. Kind of leaving it to your discretion, and then we can comment on it as needed.
All right, that sounds good. Any other thoughts on that piece? Okay, and so then Sam also brought up the introduction piece that Sean mentioned earlier. I'm also happy to work on that. I think Sean expressed some interest in working on that. Excellent.
Yeah, maybe we can connect on both. We can hit this room or something, whatever, the paragraph, and then send it out to you all. We have the big screens and something. It might just be helpful to just crank it out quickly. So, but you and I can chat offline on when that can happen.
Okay, excellent. So does that work for the group if Sean and I take a stab at this introductory piece? And the answer that I heard from Sam was it was both, what process did we take? How does the reader approach this document? How is it organized? And then functionally, what's the big picture here? If I were to only read this paragraph, what's the gist? So we can try to capture that in the sort of introduction, maybe a conclusion piece as best we can. I think one thing that could help here with the material to include in that is maybe going through some of the key recommendations or the larger document and sort of highlighting an area that if you were to have one major takeaway of the work that we did, like what's something that you would definitely want to have as like the focal point for the reader. I think Marge highlighted this circular economy piece, the sustainable materials management planning, kind of the upstream approach of everything that we've been incorporated so far. I think that seems like a good takeaway. I know we did a lot of work on the 2040 sort of paragraph that we put together that talked about incorporating a sustainable materials management approach, the values that we've discussed, values that are established in other documents that we've come across in the state and larger. So I guess just maybe highlight an area that what you would really want to have included as a focal point for an introduction or conclusion to this work that we're putting together. Does that sound all right to the group? That could be a good exercise too in finding out what might be missing. Yeah, Marge.
Okay, I guess I'm still confused at a pretty high level. Under key findings, we have C1-KF1. So KF1 is key finding 1. C1, is that charge 1? And is that the charge that says contracting out? So all of these key findings are about that one charge? Or am I just totally misunderstanding the C1?
Yeah, let me walk you through. This is this approach evolved yesterday as we were trying to put this document together. So I'll walk you through my attempt at this. So what we did essentially, we put C1 being our subcommittee. Our subcommittee's name is C1. That relates back to the charter. So we're C1
Okay.
SMMP subcommittee. So
okay. So it really doesn't, the key findings do not really link back to charges in any way.
So not exactly. So it links back into charges.
Not in that way anyway.
Yeah,
Okay.
only in the way that I've structured it. So only in the way that key finding 1, C1 KF-1 is associated with contracting out. Similar in the second one, I just organized it that way so we can keep track of it. And I think that Sam was planning on going through our charge and essentially making sure that we're providing some deliverable, or the work group is providing some deliverable associated with each of our charges. So that's why I approached it that way. But yeah, the C1 just stands for our subcommittee. So that way, when the work group is discussing each of these recommendations, somebody can say, hey, I had a question about A2 KF1. So we know that was the land use subcommittee A2, their key finding number 1. So
Okay.
that was a number.
Yeah. Okay. No, I immediately kind of got where you were coming from, but I do have another question. When you say we discussed yesterday, do you mean you and Sam discussed yesterday?
No. So this was me and Sam, but also our other staff that are helping to put this product out there for the group's review. So all of the subcommittees sent in work product that had to be compiled into a document. So that included that was the document that you all received last night.
Okay. So it was just a general bringing together of all this, of the subcommittees, all of the subcommittees work, not just this SMMP piece.
Yeah, and so the work that we were doing was basically, how do we put it on a page that it made sense for a reader? Because we looked at them all individually as a subcommittee, and it made sense in our vacuum, and then we put it all in one major document. Like, oh man, we're going to need a numbering system for the work group to figure this out. So it was just something we're working through and figuring out how it'll all come together.
Okay.
Any other questions about like how this is presented in that larger draft that you received last night from Sam, or suggestions on how we can approach it moving forward? So we do have the major gap here is key findings that we kicked it off with. So I think that's somewhere we should kind of focus our efforts. We can spend some time today talking about it, maybe 15 minutes or so. And then I think we should try to figure out essentially what we should be reporting out to the work group to get their input. Like what are the 3 main subject areas that we need the work group input on, and as it relates to our work, and then just figuring out who wants to do that report out, and then very briefly our next 2 subcommittee meetings to go over this work. So how does that sound? Should we dive into key findings in more detail today, or should I leave it with you all to just review and send me edited documents that I can incorporate for our next discussion? What do you think would be more helpful? Yeah, Sean.
Just on a process way. So what absolutely has to be given to the full committee tomorrow / is what we have enough? And what you're referencing is formatting.
Yeah, so what makes it to the work group tomorrow is what you already got from Sam last night. So what we're discussing tomorrow, that's the work that we've already done. So we're already kind of shifting our brain to this draft number 3, what that's going to look like and how our content can be improved for the next round.
So if that's the process and we do get feedback tomorrow, and then we just said you and I would at least take a first crack at it and then send it out to all of you, my process brain goes into, okay, that's enough for now. Let's get feedback. And then you and I take the first crack based on any feedback we get and pull it all together, as opposed to go back, boom, and then give, and then we just kind of aggregate. Am I an idiot, or is that kind of how you're feeling that way?
I mean, I think that makes sense. You're essentially saying we should try to hash out as much as we can now on the key findings piece, so we don't have to have that extra back and forth with emailed versions of the documents.
That's number one, but also getting to your second question, what do we absolutely need to have for tomorrow? So if that's the conversation, if that's what needs, I'm just sorry. I mean, with only 30 minutes left, and I know you are just so slammed, Daniel. I just want to make sure you're getting what you need from this committee. It's sounding like we have enough for this moment, figure out what's going on tomorrow, and then come back to this with the remaining time.
Yeah, I think so. I get what you mean, like prioritizing.
That's all I'm doing.
I think you're right. So let's go ahead and prioritize what we need for tomorrow then, and then towards the end, if we have key finding kind of pieces that we can incorporate, let's get to those. So thank you, Sean. Thanks for keeping us on track. So thinking about priorities being essentially the ask, I think it was from Sam last time, is coming to the work group with 3 kind of key pieces of feedback that we think we need from the work group to move forward. Is there any sort of section? I think this could be helpful if we kind of focus in on one of our charges being, subjects to be covered, or contracting out, or who needs to be at the table. That could be a good way to frame this. But is there any section that you think is sort of lacking that we might need more feedback on? Yeah, I think Ryan and Sean.
So that makes sense. I guess I would wonder, if it's 3 different things, if we're asking the work group, if maybe we ease into it and maybe start with a simple question and say, here's the list of everyone that we think needs to be at the table, and who are we missing, right? Because we want to make sure the work group is engaged. So if we say, this is the list of folks we've identified that we think need to be at the table, tell us if it's complete or not, or are we missing someone? Then I think that maybe we have 4 questions, but at least I think it starts to get folks engaged on, it's not a hard thing to answer right away, and see if we can immediately get some feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. That's like facilitator expertise being demonstrated right there. So I think we had Sean and then Marge.
I love Ryan. I was going to say almost the same, but he's smarter than I am. I think that's a great way to start getting people's juices flowing. Same exact thing on what we want this SMMP to include. Cradle to cradle, not just a waste management plan, economic opportunities, equity opportunities. I just love you, Ryan, for just saying, like, what are the big issue topics are we missing as we shift from this archaic, just focus on the landfill, and start something brand new in this community about starting from cradle to cradle? what huge principles are we missing from that perspective, and kind of the exact same thing, white paper, bulleted points, whatever it is, and to make sure we're captured, because this is not small. I mean, I started in 2015. These conversations y'all are having are not what I came into almost a decade ago. So this is really great and encouraging, and I just want to make sure we're capturing all the great brains in the room. So that was my ditto, Ryan, except for how the shift into a truly more sustainable perspective and not just actions.
Thanks, Sean. So for that, would we kind of provide a list of the like major focal areas, like the sort of chapter heading areas, almost trying our best to capture what we focused on that way, and then saying based on this, is there focal areas that we should be including here?
Kind of like our outline, and just from our very thematic, like I can do that 3 minutes and email you the bullet and let me circular cradle to cradle principles, and then not diving into every single table of content, those 8 or 9 pages, but just, hey, this is where we're shifting. Are we missing something that is truly valuable to our community? Again, I keep coming to equity and what was it, Metro or something. Ryan, you're waste management from the beginning. When you're building huge commercial, are there things that we don't need to do at the beginning in order to get into a more sustainable, like those kinds of principles? I just bullet list, and that'll help you and me, Daniel, help write that intro, at least for this report, not for the next one, but just for this one. So basically, I'm plagiarizing and cheating. That's the only intent of what I'm trying to do.
Thanks, Sean. I think I understand that path. So, Marge, go for it.
Yeah, what Sean said, yeah, all the things that you brought out, sustainable material plan, all cradle to cradle. These are the concepts that we've been talking about now for in our entire subcommittee, and what I don't see in here is even a major section that covers that. That to me is what we were supposed to be doing this whole time. And to me, what I see here is ancillary things like who's going to come, do we have a team color, these kind of, and I don't see that meat. And gosh, Sean, if you would write something, put something on paper that that reflects what just what you just said. And the other thing that we talked about a lot is we have an unusual community here. We have a university, we have forests, we have rivers. How do we take advantage of this unique situation that we are in, and have a consultant who incorporates that. Those kind of things to me are what's important about having a sustainable materials management plan.
Thanks, Marge. Yeah, Sean.
I think one of the biggest things, and you made my brain finally get this splinter out of my brain, is the order. And I don't know how much leeway we have in our 8-bullet order, but it's just so weird to have the number one thing being how to contract, as opposed to be the number one thing is what are we supposed to be doing? And hopefully that might cascade a little bit more better. I just said more better. I just failed high school English, but something to the effect of, this is what we're supposed to do, and then get into the details of contracting, benefit, or maybe even the Vision 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative being second, or like kind of cascade it in a more thematic way. And maybe that's, again, I don't want to take time necessarily going one by one and wordsmithing us to death, but maybe that's something we can also either ask the committee or we just take a crack at reorganizing that. I'm going to say cascade 4 times in 10 seconds, but just something along those lines of, I agree with Mars. The most important thing is this is a fundamental thematic shift from where we have been and where we go, and just kind of hit people at the beginning. But I don't know how much leeway we have, or is this Moses off the Mount stuff, or is this something that we can change?
Thanks, Sean. Just generally to approach that, I'm pretty certain we have a fair amount of leeway in how to structure it. We don't have any leeway in covering things that aren't associated with our charge, but essentially if we're reorganizing how to understand or how to read through the charges and the elements that we've approached, I think that's totally fine. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, I came on to say basically that. I would certainly say that we should, at this point in time, be really forthright in just making the document work for us. We've inherited a bunch of structures in kind of the process going forward, but those are inherences that we can move beyond. I just want to note one other thing, and that is that as it turns out, I did not receive the communication from Sam. So I've been at a little bit of a disadvantage this whole meeting because I never received any of those documents. So that's why perhaps I've been kind of uncharacteristically silent until this moment. But Daniel, if you can kind of take that up with Sam. I think he sent out an email saying that there had been some bounce backs, but I didn't get any communications about this meeting at all. So
thank you, Ken. Yeah, I'll definitely, I don't think that document that was sent out at 11:30 last night, it's not on the webpage yet. So we'll be adding that document to the webpage to make sure that everyone can access it. And then B, we'll make sure that the bounce back issues or whatever was preventing you from getting that is cleared up, because there's definitely no fun being out of the loop on these conversations. But I also I don't like to reference things that aren't very easily accessible on the webpage during our conversations. So sorry about that, and I'll make sure that we get that updated. All right. Any other thoughts on this? I'm tracking a couple things just in terms of the major topic areas that we want to get from the work group to help advance our subcommittee work. We kicked it off with maybe this, here's who we envision at the table during this process, and asking the work group who's missing. Is there any kind of feedback on that? And then we have this kind of larger piece of, here's a brief summary of really what this whole subjects to be covered piece of our charge has, the direction that we're going, and the major shifts that are occurring between what we've seen in the past with sustainable materials management planning across the state and the country versus what we're hoping will be the approach moving forward. Are we missing anything? Those are the kind of two major areas that I've tracked so far. A, did I get that right? Am I summarizing that correctly? And B, is there anything else that we want to ask the work group? I think two things being of this scale is probably okay, but I just want to make sure that we're getting the most of that 45 minutes or so that we have with the work group. I'm getting a thumbs up from Sean. Some nods. Anything else? Yeah, Marge.
I would like to request that Sean at least be part of the presentation to the work group, and I would request that he focuses on what he was talking about just the way his description of the project that we envision and that we've been talking about for the last 2 months.
Sean,
Which to me is the meat and potatoes of this whole SMMP thing, is what is that final product going to be? And all these ancillary, and I'm not saying that they're not important. I'm just saying that they're not the main course.
Thanks, Marge. Yeah, Sean, what do you think about maybe taking the lead on presenting this?
That's fine. A couple of conditions. Daniel, Sam, and I also CC Darren about 10 minutes before this started. I just realized I had a personal matter that scheduling conflicted about 3 weeks ago, and I didn't check the 19th. That's on me. But I can stay till 5. If there's an opportunity to switch the agenda around, yes, I'm more than happy to lead that conversation. But Sam, I didn't know how locked in I assume you're going the typical A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we can shift this up higher, I can make it.
Maybe-
It actually got switched around. I don't have the agenda in front of me because again, my internet is now down
Okay.
again.
E is
So I'm
first.
back on my mobile.
A is second, and then I think the land use is next. But if this subcommittee could scoot in after E, the reason E is first is because we have time constraints, and we mentioned them first.
Okay.
But
That's
we
fine.
won't take that long. But A will take an hour. Yeah, I mean, we, if we look at what's happened in the past, some of these subcommittees report much longer than others. And, ours will not be that long of presentation. So if we could slide them in, this one in next, that would be awesome.
So as soon as we get off this call, maybe Daniel can call me and see if that fits in. I'm happy to accommodate. So it would be education first, SMMP second, and then we'd slide everything else down.
Then I'm more than
Is what
happy to
you're
do that.
suggesting.
I'm more than happy to do that. Daniel, what I will do before my 3 is give you like a 2-sentence with like 5 bullets to start the conversation. And since I don't know if I'm sure I could find all your emails, but I think it'd be a little faster if you do it. And then you add your stuff in just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm talking like high level bullet points. We're not into crafting haiku yet, just big picture, make sure we're not missing something. So when I start, we have something to display to the members. Is that cool with you, Daniel?
Yeah, and I think your approach to this has been comfortable for Marge, and it looks like
Okay.
the other folks as well. So yeah, go for it, Marge.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, Ken has contributed a lot in that same vein of real substantial subject matter for what and context within which this SMMP should be developed. And so maybe Ken could send something to Sean, or Ken could be on hand as well, to bolster. But I think the main thing about the presentation should be about how the SMMP will change the way that we look at waste management in our county. I mean, we have a real opportunity here to do things differently than and better, and more environmentally conscious and lots of stuff. And okay, I'm done.
Thanks, Marge. I know it's an exciting topic. We're all there with you. All right, so we have Sean kind of taking the lead. He'll put together some bullet points on this. Ken is going to be there to support, add anything that might be sort of missing from that. And really the idea is to pose these 2 questions to the work group and get their feedback. Does that sound good? Pretty good approach. A no from Ken.
Yeah, I'm willing to lend support behind the scenes, but
Okay.
I'm not willing to step in front.
Thanks, Ken. All right, excellent. So I think we have that relatively squared away. Is there any other thoughts on that piece, presenting and getting feedback from the work group? All right, hearing none, let's just briefly talk about our next 2 meetings, and then we'll use the last minutes thinking about how to bolster our key findings here. So we obviously have a fair amount of work ahead of us. We have another draft, it sounds like, going out Wednesday. Sam, is that what you're saying, is draft 3 is going out Wednesday?
Correct.
Okay, so I guess I wanted to figure out what should be our meeting schedule so that we can, in terms of approaching this next draft, can we meet before that Wednesday to have one extra opportunity to get our 2 cents in before this next draft goes out? Or do we want to just send content and suggestions on editing our material so far to me to incorporate into the next draft without us meeting? I can pull up the calendar now and see what we have as options, but I just wanted to get a sense of generally how do we feel? Do we want or need to meet before next Wednesday? I'm more than happy to be doing that. Or are we comfortable with sending material over to me to incorporate into the draft without meeting to review it until afterwards? Yeah, Ken.
I would prefer the latter. It just seems like what is appropriate here is for us to do some thinking and some writing, and have a chance to look at, kind of aggregations essentially of thoughts and words and the way people express them. We don't necessarily need to meet about that. And I'm also just chafing a bit at this sort of breakneck schedule.
Yeah.
So I think a little bit of time to reflect, especially since we're kind of reassembling the document. I think that's kind of better done with iterations in written form and then a discussion rather than, having kind of yet another meeting and kind of at this breakneck pace.
Thanks, Ken. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, so hearing none. So I think I definitely hear Ken's point in the pacing, especially in terms of how much we're meeting. I think we're going to be up against a time crunch in terms of pace just to get content to me to incorporate into our next version by Tuesday at noon. So though unfortunately we're still going to be up against this time crunch just to get those key findings, for instance, over to me. We're hoping to get as much material essentially and as much kind of final looking material so that the Planning Commission, SWAC, and DSAC can review this next draft. And it has relatively what it will look like at the end, a more complete version of what we put together. So I guess my ask is if we don't meet, if we can send me some content, especially on the key findings piece, but also, and maybe more importantly, just making sure that what we have key recommendation wise, content wise, is looking good and is complete. I think there's a secondary aspect of this, which will be kind of the organization. How does this read? Frankly, I think that can take place later on in this process. I really think we need to prioritize content since we're missing so much of it on the key findings side. But yeah, if I can get that by Tuesday at noon, I think that would be ideal. And then maybe we can set up a meeting time for either after that week, but in the spirit of the kind of taking a gap from the breakneck speed, we can schedule that for the week of the 30th, perhaps, for our next meeting. What do we think? Yeah, Ken.
So would it be possible for you to, what's the timeline, Daniel, for you to receive comments, crash them together and then produce another draft for us to look at? Because that would be what we are talking about. That would be happening next week sometime. Am I reading that correctly?
So I think to get a draft together for the group to look at and then revise and send me comments all before the Wednesday kind of release of draft number 3. Was that what you're getting at?
Are we talking about next Wednesday? When you say Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm talking about the 25th. The next draft will be going out to the Planning Commission and SWAC and DSAC. So we have till the 25th to get content, well, really 24th in the afternoon sometime to get content sort of revised and on paper before that next draft goes out. Yeah, Sean.
I'm always careful about this offer. My Monday is kind of free. I just sent you an email, Daniel. If there's time and if you need help, and if you and I kind of divert labor, I don't know if you're comfortable with that, but I can help out with that, and to get it to them on like Tuesday morning or early afternoon. But I don't know if that's crushing your schedule. I'm just offering it, and we can talk more offline.
Thanks, Sean. So I guess to go back to Ken's point, so I think there's a couple ways we can go about this. Generally, if we need our kind of final content over to me to compile into the next draft, or really over to Sam to put into this next draft number 3 of the larger work group document, that all has to happen by Tuesday evening. There's 2 ways to go about it. One is over the next week up until Tuesday at noon, just sending comments to me to incorporate into the next draft without having those vetted by our group before it makes it into draft number 3. So that would be giving us about a week until Tuesday at noon to get those comments over to me and reviewing, trying to make it complete based on our conversation today and based on what the work group is asking for tomorrow. The second option is compressing the review timeline. So essentially having all of you provide the next pieces of feedback over to me in the next, maybe by Friday at noon, so that I can get them into the sort of next draft, send it out back to everyone Friday evening to review over the weekend and get those kind of final comments from everyone by Tuesday at noon. So what that does, it adds in that extra kind of draft review period versus doing all of your comments based on the draft that you're seeing right now. So those are 2 kind of possibilities that I see. I think both are doable, but it really depends. I'm trying to be mindful of the sort of breakneck speed. If I guess what I'm getting at is if we can't make comments by by Friday at noon, if it's just not going to be a doable timeline, then I'd rather have the subcommittee be able to digest it a little bit more and get those comments by Tuesday at noon, the 24th at noon, and basically just have those comments as incorporated as possible into the next version for the draft number 3. But obviously, I think the more the group is reviewing revisions, the better the product is going to be, and the further along we're going to get. So it just really depends on the timeline that everyone has. Yeah, Ken.
So I guess of those 2 alternatives, and thank you for spilling those out. I understand entirely what is going on. I think that I would prefer the first, because essentially it enables people to focus on getting the document that they want. It puts a little bit of pressure on you, perhaps, or you and Sean, because you'll just be receiving these versions and have to reconcile them in some way. But I have a feeling there's not going to really be a lot of controversy or conflict between them. I think people are going to be trying to get to the same place, and the thing of it is we can produce that version for the draft that's going to be distributed in the manner that you talked about. But then we can come back later, as we're heading for the final of it, and actually spend some time reconciling anything that might have gotten overlooked or had been not as emphasized as much as we felt was appropriate, etc. So that sort of refining, I guess, would not be reflected in the draft that we sent out for review, but it would not be baked in. We could back it out or correct it, refine it. So that's why I would suggest the first option.
Yeah, I think that was very well said, Ken. It's definitely not locked in, and I like the idea of erring on the side of, more information, trying to make it extra complete. And if we want to refine it in the upcoming versions, that's good, and I think that's what we should expect. But making sure that at least the possible amount of content is going to be able to be considered by the Planning Commission, SWAC, and DSAC. I really like that, kind of erring on the side of more content and making sure it's as complete as possible. So just to recap, Ken's suggestion is going with the Tuesday at noon deadline, basically not having additional revisions between now and Tuesday at noon, but sending those comments to me. And then me and possibly Sean and the rest of the staff team would be working with Sam to compile this into the draft number 3 that the Planning Commission and SWAC and DSAC will review. And then in subsequent versions, basically our next meeting, I think the goal would be to make sure that looks good. Making sure that if there's anything that we disagree with, anything that we want to improve, that's the conversation that is our focal area. Does that sound good to everyone else? I'm seeing a thumbs up from Sean, a nod from Marge, thumbs up from Ryan. Yeah, Ken.
Well, just to also point out that, if people have thoughts, they can always attend the SWAC DSAC meeting and voice them there, and we can implement the changes there, or at least recommended changes.
Yeah. Yeah, and the SWAC and DSAC and Planning Commission feedback will come in, I think, generally through a separate channel than, to our subcommittee, but it'll be able to make it into these versions. So that's a really good point. All right. So I think we have a good approach here. So let's make that deadline the 24th at noon. That'll give staff enough time to basically just take all those revisions, put it into the document. Generally, these documents are kind of on the clean side. So comments and sort of the formatting changes, we're going to be removing and trying to put markers in the text that say, here's an area of disagreement among the subcommittee that needs to be worked on, or here's an area that the subcommittee marked as missing that we need to add content to, whatever it is. But it'll be kind of on the comment bubble free end, but the version that we review as a subcommittee will be everything. It'll be the formatting changes, the comment bubbles, all of that, so that way we're not losing any of the minutia that we might be talking about here. But basically giving the readers something that they can navigate a little bit easier on the draft number 3 end. Okay, excellent. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, does that sound all right to you, Sam, as a timeline?
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's perfect. And this isn't in contravention of anything that's just been said. It's just to point out that in the period of time between January 25th and when the SWAC DSAC comments are due, that you'll have a good, I think it's 10 days, maybe it's 11 days in there to be working on this, like Ken just articulated. You'll be able to while SWAC DSAC Planning Commission are reviewing it, you will be able to then further refine it in the normal subcommittee pattern.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. So let's kind of map out briefly our to-dos in the last couple minutes. So the to-dos that we've talked about, largely the key findings that we're putting in the body of the larger work group report. So that's just something that we haven't really fleshed out quite yet. I think we also should be making sure that we're capturing that in our larger document. So essentially, if our larger document, right now it's structured by going through our various charges and sort of spelling out largely recommendations, I do like, and I think Ken pointed out this earlier in the kind of supporting comment around the key findings is, the commentary on how we got there, the type of discussion that took place. I think that's the commentary that we need in our larger document that we can draw very specific key findings from for our kind of shorter summarized version that makes it into the work group report. Does that make sense? Basically, I'm thinking key findings in two different areas, maybe more established in our subcommittee document and more summarized into key findings for the work group. All right, is there anything else that we think we need to focus on? We have our other to-dos for the introduction / conclusion piece of the work group report that Sean and I will be taking on, and then I will be working on summarizing some of the key recommendations that we already have into more kind of bite-sized chunks, and we'll be eventually adding links to the full document. Any other pieces that we should be focusing on in the interim between our meetings? All right, hearing none. We didn't quite get to meeting times. I think the idea is maybe we'll meet in 2 weeks on the week of the 30th. And I'll propose this time just because it's easy and see how it works for everyone else. But a 10:30 on February 1st. Does that work for the group, 10:30 to noon? I'm seeing a thumbs up from Ryan, thumbs up from Sean. A thumbs up from Ken. Possibly from Marge. Okay, excellent. Well, if that's okay, I'll send out an invite for the first then at 10:30. So that way we have it scheduled and in the books, and that's when we'll go back through and really focus on making sure that the content we've added in the meantime matches the group's expectations and looks good. All right, excellent. Thanks everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all your contributions. I think this is really coming together. All right, bye.
Thank you.